Shortly after their exodus from Egypt, the Almighty commanded Israel to build a sanctuary where his holy presence would be more accessible. We find this in the book of Exodus, chapter 25, verse 8, where God says, "Va'asu li mikdash v'shochanti betocham." Make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell among you. The tabernacle that they built was portable, and they took it down and reassembled it each time they moved during their 40 years in the desert. And even after Joshua led them into the promised land, this portable tabernacle is where they offered sacrifices and which served as their spiritual hub. Hundreds of years later, King David was outraged that there wasn't a more permanent structure for God's presence. He thought this was a disgrace. However, despite his intense desire to build a permanent house for God, he was not allowed to do this because of all the wars that he had fought. Even if the wars were completely valid and justifiable, the Holy Temple is a place of peace. When its altar was constructed, they were not even allowed to cut the stones with iron, a symbol of war. So David was not allowed to build the Holy Temple. It would have to be built by his son Solomon, who fulfilled his father's dream and built the first Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And it stood for over 400 years until being destroyed by the Babylonian invaders. When the Jews finally returned to Israel, at least some of them returned, after being exiled for 70 years in Babylon, they set out immediately to construct the second temple where the first one had stood. But it was hardly as grand or as beautiful as the first temple. So hundreds of years later, King Herod renovated and expanded the temple around the year 20 BCE into a magnificent structure. Unfortunately, this incredible edifice was completely destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 of the Common Era. Since then, Jews have been praying tearfully for a new temple in Jerusalem as a place of spiritual centrality where God's presence could be manifest and where the temple services could be resumed. 3 times a day in our standard prayer, the silent meditation of 19 blessings that we pray, we say, "Restore the service to your most holy house and accept in love and favor the fire offerings of Israel and their prayers." We pray this 3 times a day. And we have several fast days during the year where we don't eat or drink that commemorate the destruction of Jerusalem and its temple. And we have numerous practices throughout the year to remember our holy places. For example, some people will leave the part of a wall unpainted when they move into a new house. And at weddings, ashes are placed upon the head of the groom, who says under the wedding canopy the moving words of Psalm 137, "If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand lose its cunning. Let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I fail to recall you, if I fail to elevate Jerusalem above my foremost joy." Now, one of the central features of the Messianic Age will be the restoration of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. We see this in numerous biblical passages in the prophetic books, especially in numerous chapters in the book of Ezekiel. However, do we have to wait for the Messiah to build the temple? Or can we begin its construction prior to his coming? The truth is, this is not a simple topic. We find numerous views on this question in the Talmud, in the Midrashim, in the writings of Maimonides, where he seems to take both points of view himself. So there are various views on this question. One possible resolution to these differing points of view is that if the temple has not yet been built when the Messiah comes, he will certainly build it. Maimonides says, and this will prove that he is the Messiah. But many say that we don't need to wait until the Messiah comes to commence constructing the Holy Temple. But it's not so simple. There are many potential obstacles and barriers and complications in this enterprise. For example, many believe that the commandment to build the Holy Temple only applies when the majority of the Jewish people are living in the land of Israel. That is one very, very serious point of view. Another view says no. And in point of fact, they say, if you look at the second temple, when it was built by the returnees from Babylon, only a very few number of people came back from Babylon. The majority stayed in Babylon. So they built the second temple without having a majority of people living in the land of Israel. But this is a debate that goes back and forth. The other point of view says, well, sure, they were able to build it even though they weren't a majority, but they had prophets with them. It's a very involved discussion. However, the debate is now becoming academic because Israel may already have or is very close to having such a majority of Jewish people living there at this time. Some people say that another possible impediment to building the third temple is that it requires having a living prophet to clarify certain issues that are not entirely clear in the Bible. For example, where exactly do we place the altar in the temple? And this has to be precisely placed. And there are those who say that unless we have a prophet that can clarify this, then we are not able to build a temple. Another potential problem is that anyone who has become ritually impure through direct or indirect contact with a corpse cannot go up onto the Temple Mount in the place where the temple will be built. Now, the Torah has very complex laws of ritual purity and impurity. They don't really all have application today in the absence of a temple, but one of the points that is still applicable is that the place of the temple has a degree of holiness where you cannot go if you are in the category that we call a tamei mate. There are different levels of ritual, spiritual impurity. The most severe is if you had any contact with a corpse or something that was in contact with a corpse, you were in the same room that was enclosed with a corpse. And the presumption is that today, every person has had such contact. So everyone today is presumed to be what we refer to as tamei mate. And the only way to be purified of this degree of ritual impurity is through the sacrifice, through the ashes of a sacrifice called the para aduma, the red heifer, which we find in the book of Numbers, chapter 19. But it's an extremely rare animal to find a heifer that is completely red. All the hairs are red. It's not so easy to find such an animal. Extremely rare. We need to have such an animal before we can purify people to be able to go up onto the Temple Mount. Another issue is that we have to be able to verify with certainty who is a priest and who is not a priest. Only a certified, definite priest is allowed to serve in the temple. As well, the Kohanim, the priests, have to have special vestments, special garments. And it's not so clear how to make these garments today. For example, one of the colors that was used in the making of the priest's garments was a dye referred to as techelet, which is a bluish kind of color. The problem is that for many, many hundreds and maybe thousands of years, we've lost the tradition of what exactly this dye is made from. Now, there are people today who believe they have found the source of this dye, but it's a debated topic, a hotly debated topic in the Jewish community. Then there's the issue of the Holy Ark and the menorah, the candelabra, and other special vessels from the Holy Temple. What about those? Now, some people say that they were buried prior to the destruction of the temple underground in Jerusalem. And there are people today who claim that the location is known, that we know where the Holy Ark and the other vessels are. But this needs to be confirmed, at some point at least. Otherwise, there's going to have to be some way of constructing these vessels anew. And then there are very practical political considerations. We know that the government of Israel has given the Islamic Waqf control over the Temple Mount. So digging there to find the Holy Ark and the other vessels will be seen as provoking war. And of course, there's currently a major mosque sitting on the site where the Holy Temple is supposed to be built, which is a very significant obstacle. So clearly, this enterprise of building the third temple is fraught with problems and difficulties and obstacles. So what lies ahead? And there are basically three views that we find. One view is that God will build the third temple and it will miraculously descend from heaven. Can't argue with that. Now, this view is found in the Talmud and in the major commentaries to the Talmud like Rashi and Tosafot. However, some sources don't take these views literally and say it's not referring to an actual temple that will descend from heaven, but to the divine spirit that will come down and fill a man-made temple. So this, again, even though it's one of the three possible views, we're not unanimous in terms of how it's going to play out. Some believe that the construction of the third temple needs to be brought about by the Messiah. Now, the Messiah is going to be preceded, we learn from the prophet Malachi, by the return of Elijah the prophet, who, according to the Talmud, is going to resolve all the legal issues that have remained unclear. So, with the coming of the Messiah, there'll be the apparatus to resolve many of the legal issues. Obviously, the coming of the Messiah will presage dramatic political changes in the world, and it could be that that's what will be required, nothing less than the Messiah himself, to be able to construct a third temple. And finally, there are those today who maintain that we do not need to wait for God's intervention. We don't need to wait for the Messiah to come, but rather the people of Israel will build the third temple. And they insist that leading Torah scholars are empowered in every generation to resolve questionable issues of Torah law. That we didn't need prophets to be able to determine the way through a thicket of contradictory points of view. And these people today believe that they know exactly where to construct the temple and exactly where to place its altar. They actually have already constructed many temple vessels. They've made priestly garments, and they believe they can confirm the authenticity genealogically of priests, and they've begun training these priests to perform the temple service. And they have secured several candidate red heifers. So there are people today who don't only say that it's theoretically possible for human beings to one day build the temple. There are groups today of Jews who are actively pursuing such a project. Now, whether other leading Torah sages will go along with their views remains to be seen. People cannot act unilaterally, and it's not clear how they will overcome the potentially explosive political considerations. But hopefully, we will all see a positive resolution to these issues in the very near future.